Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to our friends on the West Coast. And welcome to today's presentation on how software can improve your remote culture reality. And Carrie, it doesn't look like I have access to actually click through the slides. Can you go ahead and click it to the next one here for me? My name is Charles Summers. It is my pleasure to be serving as your moderator today. My goal is to make today's presentation as interactive as possible, so we've gone ahead and added a few fun polls to the discussion today. If you have any questions at any point during today's presentation, please use the GoToWebinar questions queue. We'll stop and answer questions as we go, as it makes sense, and we'll also have a 15-minute Q&A at the end of the conversation today. So please fill up that questions queue. We'll get to your questions with some answers. If you'd like to reach out to me about any Humantelligence webinar questions or future webinar topics, feel free to reach out to me directly at charles.summers@humantelligence.com, or just feel free to chat me on LinkedIn as well. As the news of COVID-19 outbreak reshapes our reality, there's no doubt that this is a challenging time for our companies and our cultures. More than anything, I hope that you and your loved ones are safe and well. I also want you to know that Humantelligence is here to support you throughout the coming months and weeks. On our last webinar, we actually did a poll to our audience of 151 organizations, where 85% of those people told us that they are moving at least part of their operations to a remote culture, remote setting. 16% of those people told us that they currently have tools that'll help them measure, manage, and hire for a remote culture. So understanding that need, we're stepping up and we're offering a 90-day trial of our platform to teams who find themselves in that situation. So if this is something that you're interested in, let me know. I can get you set up. Once I'm done talking here and I kick it over to our presenter, I'm also going to put that link so you can request that trial right in the chat box. So take a look there. That should be 30 seconds from now. I'll put it in there. So our presenter is going to give a lot of insights into the things that you can do today to keep your culture intact during the shift. And he's also going to show you some functionality in our free trial to help you kind of get the most out of it. So I know a lot of you, just looking at the people that are on here, I recognize quite a few names as people who have signed up for it so far. If you haven't, feel free to sign up for it. If you've already signed up for it, some of these tips today, we'll actually show you how to do some of that in the platform. So at this time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to kick it over to our webinar presenter, co-founder of Humantelligence, Carrie Leidick. So Carrie, I'll go ahead and kick it over to you. So take it away.
Hey, Charles, thanks so much. And I really want to welcome everybody for joining us today. I know that it's a super chaotic world right now. You've got lots of competing priorities. So we just want to send some gratitude out there for setting aside some time in your day to join us. We really want to make it super useful for you and practical. So we have some ideas to share, some things that we've learned over the course of our time as a completely virtual company over the past many years since our founding. We have employees that work on our team from around the world. Our CEO is in Miami. I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area. Charles is in FEMA Zone 6 in Dallas, and most of our product development team is both in Colombia and Spain. We have other team members in Los Angeles, Chicago, Atlanta, New York, and we've had to figure this whole thing out, on a trial and error basis as we go. And I've learned some things over the years around providing remote team leadership in particular that is, less effective, more effective. Charles also leads a team at Humantelligence, so I want him to chime in, as we go through some of these things that we've learned, and we want to put some ideas in front of you. I think he's implemented some great strategies, especially around using agile processes with his team. And what you'll see in our recommendations is that particular theme is going to become more and more prevalent as teams have to collaborate across different geographies and time zones and stay on the same page. What we have for an agenda today, let me just make sure I can get these slides right. Okay, good. The agenda today is really simple. It's pretty much 3 topics, just setting some context around the new reality that everyone is facing today. The framework for that I'd like to talk about is starting from the big picture. You know, what are we all facing economically? We've got, you know, an 11-year run on growth in the economy, and suddenly things have changed. You know, my son, who's 20 years old, you know, has basically grown up in that environment. You know, not all of us, and especially younger folks in the workforce, you know, we're not there, you know, in 2008 through 2011, you know, when the last crash happened, and that's from an economic perspective. The new reality for organizations, you know, addressing crisis, moving people to remote. You know, there's certain things that organizations are doing. You know, the survival of businesses, especially small businesses, is going to be dependent on the ability to respond quickly, you know, in those external environmental changes. So we'll talk a little bit about what organizations are facing. And then a new reality for both leaders and individual contributors as team members, you know, in having to face the COVID-19 crisis that we're going through right now, but then also longer term implications for remote leadership, leadership in general, but also the future of work overall. There are going to be fundamental shifts that we're going to experience in the workplace and in the nature of how work gets done that will not change after this crisis is over. And to be paying attention to those longer term trends is going to be of particular importance in order to get through it on the other end. We're going to talk some specifics around transition to remote leadership. Now, you know, you've got probably a barrage of emails, webinars, you know, there's lots of messaging that's coming out from great organizations that are experts in things like virtual team meetings, virtual collaboration tools, technology, security. So those are lots of topics that, you know, we could dive into. What I want to focus on are just some really practical things that leaders, team leaders in particular, when I say team leaders, I mean people who directly manage a team of people, you know, typically 3 to 6 or 12, you know, direct reports. We're going to focus on what you can do in the near term in order to help through that transition from what would be normally an office-based relationship with your team or partially remote. You know, lots of people who work from home 1 or 2 days a week, now having to work from home 100% of the time. What are some of the things that you can do as a team leader to help through that transition? We're also going to go into some details about how Humantelligence, not so much about how Humantelligence as a company can help, because, you know, we certainly want to do that, as Charles mentioned, but how you can use Humantelligence as a platform and a tool, as a software tool to bring your team into very quickly and be able to get some practical help in the near term in that anxiety provoking uncertain time, you know, that everybody is facing right now. And then if we have some time, we'll go over some other great resources that we found that we'll point to. If we run out of time, I'll also want to make sure there's plenty of room at the end for questions and answers. But the resources will be included in the post-webinar material that'll be sent to you. We've got some ones that we're going to recommend that you do right away. And then we're also assembling some resources that we're going to continue to add to and provide sort of a curated list that we think, are the things that are the best science-based approaches that you can take in dealing with, times of change and some of these other topics that we're going to cover. So that's today's agenda. Let me actually, before I go to the poll question, I want to share a little bit about a story about my own experience in this. And bear with me because it's kind of emotional for me. So about a week ago, so Monday, a week ago Monday, yesterday, 8 days ago, I woke up in the morning and suddenly it felt like my entire world had completely changed. I had emails from customers. We had emails and phone calls from sales prospects that we have been talking to for a long time. We've had, calls from our vendors. I had my kids at home, who, and by the way, if you hear teenagers trying to strangle each other, bear with me. Had my two sons who are in high school are suddenly at home and needing to do virtual classrooms. How do I manage that? And my 20-year-old son, who was in the elevator mechanics union, got his furlough notice. He's been working for a year on this apprenticeship program he's been in, and suddenly it's over, or it's on pause at least. And it was just really frightening to me. I felt scared, and what happened for me was that I started to feel tightness in my chest. I felt clammy and kind of shaky. I started to develop a headache, kind of a scratchy throat. And where my mind went, was that, oh my God, I have coronavirus. Okay. So after a little bit of going through that and calming down, realizing that what I was going through was not actually coronavirus, but what I was feeling was completely overwhelmed. So I say that and I share that because many people right now are going through those kind of experiences, and it's okay to acknowledge them. And one of the things that you can do as a leader of your teams is to be vulnerable and to not try to be Superman or Superwoman, but acknowledge that this is a challenging time for ourselves and ask for help. For me, I had to go into a self-care action plan. Now was not the time to go do one-on-ones. Now was not the time to go have a team meeting and freak everyone out, but it was time to go take care of Carrie. And I needed to do that for that afternoon on Monday. And then things were better on Tuesday, and things have been improving since. So I encourage you to consider that about vulnerability and about taking care of yourself in these times. We can't put the oxygen mask on someone else unless we put it on ourselves first. So we're going to get to some questions that you have at the end, but we have a couple of questions for you just to kick this off. So the first question, we want to understand who we're talking to in this webinar. What role do you play most during this pivot to remote work? Select the option that applies the most. Are you leading a team virtually for the first time? Are you leading a team virtually prior to COVID-19, like I just described, for myself? Are you a team member? In other words, not a leader, but you're a member of a team that's now transitioning to completely remote work? Or you are a remote team member prior to COVID-19, and this is sort of a same, there's little change for you in this situation? Or are you playing a role in your own organization where you need to provide support to those going through that transition? human resources, partners, information technology, that kind of thing. Now, you could be both, and what I would suggest, just pick the one that is most relevant to you right now. If you're an HR leader, you're probably, maybe leading a team virtually for the first time. Pick that one. So anyway, we're going to give it a pause. We're collecting the data now, and Charles is going to give us an indication when this poll is completed, and we're going to show the results.
Yep, we'll give it 10 more seconds, and while we wait, I've had a couple questions about the recording of today's session. Yes, we will send that out after today's session. Usually takes about 2 hours to buffer after the session, and then I'll get it out as soon as I possibly can. So you will receive the recording, the slides as well, and a follow-up email. Those slides can also be found in your handouts section in your GoToWebinar control panel as well. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and close the poll here and share the results.
Wow.
Gary,
okay.
Gary, can you see that okay? Cool.
Yeah, so we have almost half of the attendees today that are providing support to leaders and teams. We do work with a lot of human resources and IT people and teams, so I'm not surprised to see that, you're here trying to figure out how to help the leaders and the team members in your organization. But also 20% of the people in attendance today, and I know we have several hundred people here, that's a lot of people who are leading a team virtually for the first time. And, lots of people are transitioning to remote work. So if we combine the 19 and the 16, only 5% of people were remote team members prior to COVID-19. That's interesting to me as a researcher, because when you look at the overall US workforce, only 5%, this was surprising to me when I learned this, only 5% of the current US workforce actually works remotely 100% of the time. That's 95% of people who are facing this transition on some level. About 70% of the workforce, especially obviously in salaried positions, about 70% of the workforce works from home some of the time, maybe 1 day a week. But 95%, are not used to it. So let's go on to the next one. And let me
hang on 1 second here.
Flip.
Okay.
Let me just flip the slide. Whoops. Okay, there's the poll. You see that can you see that, Charles? Yeah, I see it.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So next question, and there's only 2 questions that we have for you. As a team leader or someone who supports team leaders, what are you struggling with? Select the option that applies the most. So what you have is are you struggling to lead through change and disruption, maintain morale and engagement right now, going to this remote environment, minimize distractions and maintain productivity, or use remote collaboration technologies? So, our people, as you observe them, most of the people on the webinar are supporting remote teams. 46% of people in the webinar today are supporting remote teams. What do you see them struggling with? Is it about the technology, the collaboration tools like Slack or Microsoft Teams, or Google Hangouts, Zoom? Is it about helping them minimize distractions and maintain productivity? People are still on the hook to deliver at the same levels from before. Maintain morale and engagement, or lead through change and disruption. Those first 2, kind of a nuanced difference, but let's just see what we get, on the poll results. We'll talk a little bit about.
We'll give it about 5 more seconds here.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to share the results here. And it's funny because, so I would have actually, if I was going to say before, but I didn't want to skew anybody's thoughts, but this is what I would have guessed. This is what's true for me for sure. Minimizing distractions. I have a dog that runs around and barks at the mailman or something like that. So that's always, for me, that's definitely something. But then maintaining the morale and engagement of my team, that's always on my mind as well, for sure. But I'll let you talk to that, Carrie.
Right. So when we combine the first two, which can be one in the same, we're seeing 47% of people, almost half of the people in the webinar today, are dealing with the change and disruption, leading through change and disruption, along with maintaining engagement. That's really what we're here to talk about, actually, are those first two. Minimizing distractions and maintaining productivity. We all have to do that. There are lots of tips around how to establish routine, create space in your home for work, set boundaries with your kids and spouse, significant others around when it's work time, when it's not work time. Maintaining productivity by making adjustments to schedules. Some people have to, especially with kids at home, have to work, say, 3 or 4 hours in the morning, take a break in the afternoon to help with homework and such, and then probably pick up some work later in the evening, where people might have been used to more strict boundaries around work and life, what was called work and life balance. What this situation is forcing us to do is take a perspective of work-life integration. I've always thought about it that way anyway. Work-life balance, where there are very clear boundaries between life and work. I've always kind of had a different mindset around that work-life integration. There are periods I have to be focused on going to my son's volleyball game at 3 p.m., but then I've got to come back and get some things done at 8 p.m. before I sign off for the night. Work-life integration, so something to consider. Now, 11% use remote collaboration technologies. What we're finding is that the way that technology works today, it's very easy to go get a Zoom video account. They're free. Lots of organizations, for example, Microsoft Teams is offering Microsoft Teams for free through this period of the crisis. And Slack is one that we really rely on a regular basis to maintain that kind of office environment virtually. Slack is an awesome tool for bringing teams together, creating channels, creating different conversations in real time. Slack also has built-in video and phone technology that you can use on demand. Really recommend taking a look at that one, especially if you're a small business that doesn't have the Microsoft 365 platform. And so anyway, those are things, but what we're finding, and this is what we're finding when we talk with our clients, is that it's less about the technology and it's more about the people and their reaction. Organizations are going to need to keep people engaged and productive through this challenging time in order to survive on the other end. And how you do that will determine how you come out on that, on the other end of the crisis. So let's go ahead and move on to the next thing. Okay. So I've got to, sorry, I'm looking at myself on this video.
And Carrie, we're almost to the halfway mark, just so you have a time reference. I don't know if you have a clock in front of you.
Sounds good. I also want to commit to you, especially, I mean, let us know if this stuff is helpful, especially when we start to get into some of the details. We'll do more webinars, and we can do deep dives on certain topics. So please, let us know if there are certain things that you'd like to go deeper on as we go through this. Big picture, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but everybody is facing this. When you look at, okay, the SARS outbreak or 9/11, the MERS outbreak, it didn't impact the markets like the COVID-19 outbreak has. It tracks more with the Lehman collapse in 2008. And, depending on who you talk to, which economists, how long is it going to take to recover from that? Let's go to the next slide. Here are some, what I would consider optimistic projections in Q4, Q3, and Q4 of this year. You notice in Q2, as we're approaching Q2 next week, major drop, but the conference board is predicting that it'll bounce right back, even more than, Q1. Now, there are other competing perspectives on that, as you look at how long it's going to take to come back. My personal opinion is that this is very optimistic. And as organizations make fundamental shifts, and what I mean by that is, for example, got an email today that Orange Theory Fitness, which has a bunch of fitness centers around the country, has just laid off 80% of their workforce, and they're closing locations. Amazon's hiring, Walmart is hiring, lots of companies like that are hiring in logistics and all that. Does Orange Theory suddenly in August turn around and hire all those people back and open those stores again, or those workout centers? I think it's going to take longer than that. And I think leaders and executives who control budgets are going to be this downturn is going to force some really serious conversations about where to put spending and how fast to fuel growth as we move ahead, having suffered the sting of this crisis. Here's an example. I'm not going to spend a bunch of time on this one at all, but this is, this is from NASA. This actually is a communication that was sent out to their employees about their COVID-19 response. They communicated multiple times a day at about which stage the organization was at and what the expectations were around protecting health and safety, access to buildings, what the policy was on meetings and events and travel. They moved very quickly from stage 1 to stage 3. And look, I point this out, NASA, Apollo 13, great movie. This is an organization that knows how to deal with crisis and codify it. So I put it out there as an example. This is something that you can do, a simplified version for your own organization to give people context. I really liked it. I thought it was top notch. When these kinds of things, when employees start to see those countermeasures and those policies come through, with the 24-hour news on, can be extremely anxiety provoking, as I shared in the beginning of this. What I find to be helpful, is around the whole is the framework about what can I control and what can't I control. And this is something that you can use as a coaching tool and a support tool to your team members. Now, this is an example about the COVID crisis specifically, but draw that circle around what I can control, fill the circle with things, relevant to that particular topic that you're dealing with, and acknowledge those things outside the circle. But this is about getting focus when your brain and your amygdala, what they call it is an amygdala hijack. You go into survival mode and everything seems important, and we try to control everything. It's a natural human response. The other useful framework, especially when you think about approaching your team members and your team, is this Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This will look very familiar, especially to HR people. If you've taken Psychology 101, in college, this will be familiar. Now, what happens in crisis and as things change, people go, they go lower on the hierarchy of needs. So maybe in January, a lot of people on your team were at the top about self-actualization, desire to become the most that they can be. And maybe what's happening right now is that they've dropped all the way down to the very first level about physiological needs, you know, the rush on food, shelter, can't sleep, you know, all of those kind of issues. So this is kind of a good gauge, you know, when you're checking in with your team members, keep this in the back of your mind, you know, where are they in this hierarchy and how can you support them where they are? It doesn't do a whole lot of good to talk to somebody about their career aspirations when they're worried about whether they can get food at the grocery store. So help them focus on, help them and support them, you know, based on what they're concerned about. So here's some key tips. I'm going to go through them pretty quickly because I want to get into showing you Humantelligence and how Humantelligence has helped us and how I think it can help you and your team leaders. The pivot to remote team leadership. Okay. The mindset around this. I really like what Lori Rudiman has to say about this. Now, Lori is a thought leader and a speaker and an author in the area of human resources management. She has a great podcast. It's called Punk Rock HR. I'd recommend checking it out. It's a great listen. She's really funny, kind of cynical, which I appreciate. But she suggests establish a new job mindset. And what that means is we're all going through the same thing as if you just started a new job at a new company. Okay, still trying to find the bathroom, still trying to figure out who do I need to talk to. I'm not getting the response from IT on my support ticket. Somebody forgot to CC me on an email. Somebody forgot to invite me to a meeting. Okay, don't take it personally. So just relax and just think it's like having a new job. And in many ways, you can help think about that from your team members' perspective. What do they need to do to develop some certain new skills or get the resources, connect them to the resources they need in the organization and break down barriers, just like you would for somebody who's just starting out in the job and a new direct report. Kind of go back to basics. Empathy is the #1 skill to have in turbulent times. It's the #1 skill for leaders in general, but you better flex it in times like these. Now, here's the challenge with empathy. Very difficult to develop as a skill, okay? It's something that a lot of leaders are gonna need support to do. It's gonna take some real self-reflection and real pause in order to do it. It's about building self-awareness. It's about being able to put yourself in the other person's shoe. And something that Humantelligence does particularly well is points you to where your biases are different than somebody else's, and it can actually help you put yourself into the other person's shoes. And I'll show you a little bit of how that works. Real practical recommendation, increase your one-on-ones 3x. Okay, so if you were used to doing one-on-ones with your team members once a week, go to 3 times a week. If you're doing it, you know, once a day, go to 3 times a day or two times a day in shorter chunks. This is about connectedness. Use video. Leave plenty of room just to check in. How are you feeling? You know, get those feelings out there and build that trust and support. But it has to be more frequent. A lot of leaders are finding that 3 or 4 hours of their day, every day, is spent in one-on-ones with their team members. I mentioned this before, start using agile methods. Charles with his team, for example, uses a daily stand-up for 5 minutes with his team. What's the number one thing you're focused on today? It gets everybody up, connect at the same time every day, and everybody knows what the top priorities is for everyone else. I love that technique. But also look at agile methods like scrums, team meetings, short cycle times, great principles on how to do that, because it really helps you stay on top of things when you go remote and you don't have access to and visibility into what everybody's working on. Finally, recognize the longer term trends. Recognize what fundamental changes are going to be in place, that may not change after the crisis. We'll talk more about that, another time. But here's the human.
And Carrie, just real quick, I have a couple of questions from the audience. If you could repeat the name of the podcast.
Oh yeah, sure. It's called Punk Rock HR Podcast.
And who's it by?
Lori Rudiman.
Rudiman. Okay. Do you know how to spell that? We can send it out after.
Yeah, it's like Reutiman, I think. Don't quote me on that, but
okay.
If you Google Punk Rock HR Podcast, Lori, you'll show up the top.
Perfect. Yeah,
and we can include it in our kit, as resources.
For sure. And just to add like a couple more things here. So you mentioned daily stand-up. Like I love the daily stand-up. That really helps all of us kind of set the stage for the day. It's actually, it's an agile method, but also if you've ever read the book, The One Thing, it's definitely a good one to read. It definitely, helps you set your focus on one thing. It works for my team. I don't know if it'll work for yours, but I definitely think that it's a good place to start. Another thing is, definitely make your workstation at home somewhere that you want to be. So I have a stand-up desk. I have like 3 different screens up here. For my team, one of my other employees has 5 or 6 screens around him. The other one, I just gave him my backup computer stand, so he can mount screens. So like things like that make you want to be in your workstation, where you don't get up all the time and walk around and kind of get away from the distractions. That definitely helps me personally. And then the other thing to keep kind of connected with my team, we have a Slack group chat going, and so I recommend putting like anything you need to say, put it in that group chat, unless it's a very private message of some kind, so that everybody stays in the loop. So that's just another recommendation that I have here. So you can move on to the next step.
No, those are great tips. It's about keeping everybody on the same page, on that Slack channel recommendation. Okay, so the Humantelligence Platform, I'm not going into a product pitch here, but what I want to do is explain what you're about to look at, about to see in what I'm going to demonstrate. Humantelligence has 3 main components that are all designed to work together. We call it the culture software. The first thing is identifying cultural characteristics at every level of your organization, especially starting with the team. You can aggregate data and identify cultural characteristics for departments, for divisions, for countries, for the entire organization. And you can start to use that data in a number of different ways. One of the most useful ways of using it is to use it as your benchmarks when you're doing recruiting. It's what we call talent fit. And we're not going to get into talent fit today or recruiting. We're going to focus mainly on culture analytics, and a few things around the third piece, which is around sustaining high levels of engagement and performance through tools in our engagement suite, what we call action management, a one-on-one feedback system, a pulse surveys system, as well as a private company network where people can connect across silos and across teams in the organization. Just by way of introduction, the very first thing that people get when they come into your private company portal, okay, which will be branded to your company. You'll notice the Humantelligence logo on the upper left. This is my personal profile. This would have your company logo. We typically brand the portal as, XYZ Company Talent Portal. It's very easy to bring all employees on your team into the portal. We have pre-made email invitations and messaging and positioning material. What everybody gets after completing a 12-minute kind of fun and easy assessment is what we call a talent profile. This is the fundamentals of my talent profile. I'm a maverick creative architect. I resonate with that. When other people in the company look at my profile, they can very quickly understand where I'm coming from. These are the hats that I wear most often when I'm collaborating with others on the team. There's other bells and whistles in here, but what I want to do is actually jump right over to the live platform. Make sure I've got this loaded properly. Okay. And what you're seeing is actually our own Humantelligence company talent portal. You see a number of different panels on this home page that gives me fingertip access to certain key features that I need. The action management system is what's shown kind of across the top, where I've got an invitation to connect. I've got a request to provide some feedback to Brianna there. And then there's a call to action there that says, watch a short video about using the talent portal to engage your team. We build in all the learning material into these actions that people can take when you bring the portal online for your team, your organization. You're able to track progress of those assignments that have been given. I'm at 87% actions completed. And you also see some things here, talent fit. This has to do with recruiting. The feedback system allows anybody in the organization to give and request feedback using a tailored list of topics and questions that are preloaded. Makes it very easy for people to just request feedback. I have a network of 205 connections. We invite lots of our partners and vendors and other people into our system and to connect with each other. So you can actually share each other's profiles that way. And then we have teams. So I want to focus on teams right now. I'm going to our company's teams dashboard. Anytime somebody is a leader or a member of a team, it shows up here on their team dashboard. We've got our product, marketing, and sales teams that are broken out under each of the leaders there. And what I want to do is jump into the Humantelligence team. And I want to point to, we have 19 people here on the team currently. And the first thing that you see is the team culture. Now, before I go here, I actually want to go to members, and everybody on the team gets access to everybody else's profile. And what I want to do is point to something that is the most popular feature that we have on this platform when you start enabling team members to come in and team leaders. So Charles and I collaborate a lot on what we're doing. And what I'm able to do is compare Charles to my own talent profile and get a sense of exactly where we're similar and where we're different, and then get very specific tips and techniques that we can use in order to collaborate more effectively together. So you can see as I scroll down, it's flagging for me, where we're different and where we're similar. Really helpful. We're going to, sorry, I've got to move this out of the way. The next thing we do after you go from understanding yourself to understanding others on a one-on-one basis is we can look at a team culture. Okay, sorry, I'm just dealing with the webinar panel over here. So on the Humantelligence team, what we call the 4 lenses of team culture is the work behaviors, the work motivators, ideal work and life priorities for the people on the team. The work it's something we refer to as BMW. It's easy to remember: behaviors, motivators, and work energizers. The fourth lens, life priorities, is a kind of a qualitative look. All of the three first lenses are scientific. So when we look at the work behaviors, the first thing you notice is there's bar charts that go down from the beginning, deliberate and decisive, all the way down to cautious and freeform. So the way to read this, these are bipolar scales. So the people on the left are more deliberate in their approach to problem solving. The people on the right are more decisive in their approach to problem solving. Now, the people who score to the left tend to be more stability-oriented people on the team, and the people who score to the right are more change-oriented. Okay, now what you notice overall about this team culture from a behavioral perspective, it's highly balanced and diverse. That's typically what you want to see. Now, when we first launched Humantelligence, it was extremely balanced toward the right. Decisive, freeform, spontaneous. We're moving like, lightning speed. Those are the kind of behaviors that were required by that founding team. We've now shifted more into growth mode. We've had to shift that culture to balance out the stability and change orientation. So it gives you exactly where you are behaviorally on that. Now, something when it comes to looking out for people who may be particularly challenged working in a remote work environment, I want to point you to a couple things. The outgoing people tend to have a high need for affiliation, okay? In a remote environment, it can be very isolating. These can be people who are subject to suffering from that, feeling anxiety about it, even leading to depression. So you want to pay particular attention to your team members who are highly outgoing. I want to move, there's other nuances about how to pay attention to particular patterns in this, but I want to move quickly so that we can get a picture and get to the Q&A. Sorry, I need to turn off the erase. Okay, now motivators are based on people's personal values. These are hidden, so the only way to learn about them is through trial and error, which can often be really painful. We've all experienced, people who are misaligned with the team's values. What we see on this team is a dominant motivator of freedom, which is an entrepreneurial spirit that's here. And knowledge. We're a science-based technology organization, so we have a drive for learning and knowledge. Those are the two dominant characteristics. When you're looking at remote work, a couple of things that you want to pay particular attention to. I'm not going to use the highlighter, it was really awkward. The helping motivator are people who may feel particularly helpless in this environment. They're used to being out there, being of service to others. They get their deep needs met by being of service to others. And on this team, we have several people, that we would want to pay particular attention to around those stressors. We also see a couple people with high belonging over uniqueness. People with high belonging need to feel that sense of belongingness to the team and the community, maybe suffering more than others on the team. And then lastly, the ideal work characteristics give you a sense of where do people put their discretionary effort and get energized from the work that's being done. We're a technology disruptor. We want people on the team that want to develop new solutions. It's a very good fit for our company. And we also have some proven methods folks that are there to help us build some sanity into our processes. But in that new solutions, we've got a lot of people and variety. That kind of comes with the territory in our company. But when you're looking at your team members and you're looking for people who may particularly struggle with remote work, and I'm talking about from a psychological perspective, Working with people, it's very similar to being outgoing. People are energized by working with people. That might be really missed by the people who fall into this category. Also, people who are more energized by structure, because they may be used to the organization or the team providing structure that might be now missing. And so you need to pay particular attention to helping those people develop some structure for themselves. They may not do it as naturally, as other folks on the team. And then we can even see our life priorities, where we can see that on our team overall for Humantelligence, we're achievement oriented, but we also value friendship, integrity, personal development, and responsibility. It's just another lens and view into, what this team is driven by. And all of these characteristics, as we walk through each one, let me just shift back to the people chart. These point to individual strengths and team level strengths. What you want to do is play to your strengths. So when you're working with team members, you want to look at two things. One is how you compare, because it gives you sort of superpowers actually on knowing where both of your biases are coming from, and you can meet halfway on getting to a deeper level of collaboration, communication, and understanding with each other. And then on a team level, knowing where your blind spots are, and especially, in this transition to remote work, what are some of those skills, behaviors, motivators, work energizers that are missing, or that, present strengths to the team that you can build on. Those are things that you can get just from this data, and you can start to put action plans in place. So I'm going to, let me see here. I'm going to pause there and go back to the slides. And let me just mention a couple things. And Charles, maybe you could help me if we start to assemble any questions that
Sure, yeah, we have about
Oh,
4 right now, just so you know.
okay, let me just mention, we have a few other resources that are going to come through. We actually have partnered with a great organizational consulting firm and survey research firm called Org Vitality. They've published a COVID-19 pulse survey. There's a list of questions that any team leader can use, or team member organization can use, to pulse your organization on these topics and maintain confidence of your employees in the wake of this crisis. So really appreciate Org Vitality's contributions there. You also see a lot of companies that are stepping up. These are some of the things that we found that I really like from quality sources. Udemy is doing some great stuff on e-learning and putting some webinars out there. Josh Bersin, if you're going to remember one name, Josh Bersin, I'd really recommend following Josh Bersin. He just published a blog post on the crisis. I thought it's a 15-minute video that is excellent. There's Org Vitality. They're offering a webinar on managing people through uncertainty. DDI has some on-demand courseware that they're making available for free, and Slack, has some great material on this one, for example, the manager's manual for remote work. And then finally, I'll just wrap it up by recommending some reading. If you want to go offline and read a physical book, grab this one from Amazon. Can You Hear Me? How to Connect with People in a Virtual World. So relevant right now. It goes really deep into the human need to connect, and gives you really practical recommendations. And I think that's particularly relevant for our team leaders right now. And finally, if everything just goes to hell, pick up Bushcraft 101. It's actually the best guide for wilderness survival. So that's about all I have as far as recommendations. let's go into the questions. Hopefully we won't run short on time. I think we're
Perfect.
actually
Yeah, and we've got 4 questions. So, I mean, Carrie, if it's okay with you, maybe we just go 3 or 4 minutes over. I know not everybody will be able to hang on here, but what we can do is we can send out the recording to everybody after, in case we don't get to your question live here. So we'll keep on answering them as long as people stay on the line here.
Sounds good.
Cool. All right. So let me go back to the very first question. How do you assess performance of employees working remotely across different job functions? So the examples they gave were sales, administration, etc.
Right. You know, it's all about clarity. Okay. So there's the big C of clarity and there's the little c of clarity. Big C clarity is about clarity of strategy, clarity of direction, you know, all those things that typically lives in that executive suite on getting the organization aligned and moving in the right direction. The small c of clarity is the team leader's job, okay? And in the remote environment, when you're shifting from going to remote and not having as much visibility, it's about getting more clarity, and you just can't have enough of it. More clarity on the results that are expected, and you need to make a shift from measuring time and activity to a shift to results. And then you have to just loosen the reins on allowing people to figure out how to get to the results. So the job is figure out, you know, in each of those functions. Now, sometimes sales is easier to do than administration or operations, but it can still be done about getting clear on what's expected week to week, month to month, and getting agreement on that in a level of specificity that can be measured and checked in on a regular basis. Get away from measuring the length of participation that people spend in the meetings. The face time in the office is no longer relevant. So go to results and measure them.
Thank you. So the next question for the demo for the demo that you showed,
it's 12 o'clock.
You showed some different characteristics. How can I map characteristics so that I can show who's vulnerable remote, and what tools do you have to infuse that into daily processes?
Yeah, so we didn't show this part of the system, but we have a tool that's built in there for team leaders. It's called the culture map for your team. And what you're able to do is go in there and create what we call a target team culture. And you can dial in and look for particular characteristics, which will help you do high outgoing, high working with people, high belonging, high helping. You know, those characteristics, you turn the dial on those characteristics, you click a button, and it gives you a score from 0 to 100 on exactly where each of your team members is against that benchmark. And you can start focusing on the people who score high on the risk factors. That's a practical approach. We didn't demonstrate it, but it's something that we'll be showing in future webinars for the folks who sign up for the free Team HT for Teams account.
Yeah, and we'll definitely be doing another webinar on this topic in a couple of weeks too. We've got a lot of good feedback from the audience on what kind of topics they'd like to see going forward. We've probably got 10 different comments, so feel free to keep those coming, and we'll definitely craft another webinar here in another week or two on a similar topic. But then I think another part of that question is another thing we haven't shown today, which we can show you if you sign up, is the actual plugin itself. So if you're sending an email to a team member, or you're going into a meeting with a bunch of team members, you can actually pull up the profiles in your Google email or calendar or Outlook right within there, and you can actually see tips for communicating with that group. You can see that kind of culture map and see exactly where everybody lies, so you can have, you know, an in-depth listing of ways to communicate with people and collaborate. So the next one here, Carrie, how do you determine what roles are to be remote in an organization and what roles would be impacted by this?
Boy, that's a good one. It's really going to be very specific to organizations. I mean, right now we're kind of facing a challenge with everyone having to go remote except for essential services. So that just is what it is. I think as you consider coming out of that, shelter in place or stay at home situation, organizations are really going to be taking a close look, at what work can be done remotely, and what work, can be done in the office. Here are two kind of ways of thinking about that. One is the work independent? Okay, so there was a study actually, this was on the Freakonomics podcast that just recently that talked about remote work. A company in China called Trip.com, kind of the Expedia of China, did an experiment where they asked 1,000 of their workers in the contact center to work remotely. It was volunteer. 500 of those workers took them up on it and started working from home. And they worked for 9 months, and then they allowed workers to come back to work if they wanted to. 50% of those people, those 500 people, took them up on the offer to come back in the office. The main complaint: isolation, anxiety, depression, all of that. However, they saw a 30% increase in productivity from the at-home workers compared to the in-office workers. They could focus and get their work done faster, more productively. Now, what's the lesson from that? Productivity-wise, as long as the work is independent and it's not depending on interactions with other people, these would be independent outside sales reps, customer service reps who can field calls, from anywhere. Those kind of roles, where the team is more of an assembly of individual contributors, but the team's results are not dependent on the collaboration. Okay. What they found in the research is that what suffered most in taking a team remote was actually innovation. Innovation is mainly dependent on the informal interactions of people, and you really lose those informal interactions. So pay attention to if the work is independent, can be done independently, it's not dependent on collaboration. And the more collaboration that's required, the more you want to have the work done face to face, especially if the theme for the organization's objectives is innovation.
Perfect. And Sheila had a second question, but it sounded like you actually answered that part. So Sheila, if I'm wrong, let me know and we'll ask that one out loud. But I'm going to move on to the next one here. How do you motivate your employees to enrich their information to identify the characters?
Okay, enrich the information. So I think what you're meaning is, how do you get people to fill out their questionnaire in order to get the data on their profile? Do you think that's where we're going?
Yeah,
Charles?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Yeah, it's all about positioning, and it's about marketing and selling. When we do implementations, especially in large organizations, we'll get a 90+% penetration on people filling out their questionnaires and getting a talent profile. It's just all about positioning what the individual benefits will be for those employees. People get a really useful set of feedback about what makes them tick, how they can be more effective. Most people are driven by that, and that can often just be enough. There can be some soft or kind of harder expectations set by policy or by the team leader about encouraging people to get that data in there so all of the team members can benefit, and emphasizing the need for increased and more effective communication and collaboration, this being a critical piece of that. And you also want to make people feel safe. This can feel sometimes like, I'm kind of opening the curtain on what makes me tick, and some people are more comfortable with that than others. What we find is because all of the feedback and the profiles are use positive psychology in the way that they're explained, there are no wrong answers. Everything is positioned as a potential strength or something to watch out for. We just find that once people get a little bit of exposure to it and they start talking with some of their colleagues, and they, let's say, get an invitation to connect with their colleague who wants to communicate more effectively with them, people loosen up and they become comfortable with it. And we worked with cultures like very old school company cultures where that has not been the norm, and people really took to it. So, we have some techniques that you can use if you have some particular challenges with that.
Thanks, Kerry. So if my audio cuts out, it's because my headphones are dying. But so the next question. So we've actually got 4 more, and they're continuing to come in. We've got about 100 people that are hanging out with us still.
Oh, great. That's cool.
Yeah. So keep the questions coming. I can't promise we'll stay on too much longer, maybe a few more minutes, but we'll answer the next couple here. And I have a lot of questions about sending the slides and recording. I'll make sure that happens. One person asks for the findings of this experiment. We'll get that to you, Christina. So next question here is, how do you convince your clients that online service or video conference is just as good as having the consultant on site?
It's not. So how do you convince your client? I mean, there are definitely ways, everyone's facing the same situation around restricted travel, office visits. This is how I think about it. Invite people into a video meeting, always have your video on. Okay, and pay particular attention to the quality of the audio in the meeting. Okay, nothing is more annoying to people to hear that or listening to the background noise because you're driving in the car or whatever. Set aside a quiet space, be on a video with an appropriate background. If you need to plug in an external microphone, just get all of that set. Imagine that you're, presenting a video podcast or a webinar. Be present. Just try to make it as personalized as you can. And what'll happen often is that your client or your customer will resist turning on their video. They'll say, oh, no, I don't have my webcam, or, I'll just listen. Gently encourage them to turn on their webcam, but set the example by always doing it yourself. And there's only so much that you can do to help them feel more connected. But I always encourage people, we always encourage our customers and people that we're working with to turn on their webcams and, be more connected.
Perfect. Yeah, and I know a lot of the video providers out there right now are experiencing tons of new customers out there. So, for example, GoToWebinar. I know a lot of you had trouble getting your email because their servers went down for 3 days. So, just all these new customers coming in and can actually slow down GoToWebinar. So I'm sure it'll happen. You'll all experience it at some point with your provider. So. Anyways, so the next one here, virtual meetings take so much time. Do you have some tips on, hang on, let me reread this. Virtual meetings take so much time. Do you have some tips to conduct virtual meetings effectively?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I sure do. I mean, the research out there says that virtual meetings 33%, a third of a virtual meeting is wasted time. That, you know, especially with internal meetings. I don't know. I mean, some of you might feel like it's even higher than that, but we're challenged with, you know, dealing with that lost productivity in virtual meetings. So it's a great question. What does the data show about virtual meetings? Here's a very specific recommendation. Keep it to 45 minutes. The ideal length of a meeting is 45 minutes in a virtual environment. If it goes longer than that, split it into different sessions. If you have to go an hour and a half, split it into two 45-minute sessions. If decision making is happening in that meeting, and it's not just a broadcast of here's some information, if dialogue and decision making is happening, maximum of 6 people in the virtual meeting, always webcams on, all microphones open. And then thirdly, conduct the meeting on Tuesday at 10 a.m. So that's the ideal time for having everyone energized, attention, you know, they're not overwhelmed by planning from Monday. Productivity is highest between 9 a.m. and 11 a.m. So hit that sweet spot at 10 a.m. on Tuesday. So, you know, if you're going to, let's say, a virtual team meeting suddenly, that would be the time slot that I would go for if it's available, and try to, you know, follow those other constraints and best practices.
Yeah, and also I think, you know, make sure you have an agenda too, so you don't get too far off topic. I know that, you know, meetings can often go down a rabbit hole. So in particular I'll just give you one example with our daily stand-ups that we do. You only get to say one thing for the day. You might have 1,000 things you've got to do today. We only want to hear one of them, right? So we want to hear your most important thing you're going to get done. Anything beyond that, you should get. What we do as a team, we're like, no, you only get one thing. So that's how we keep it on time and keep it under 5 minutes. So
yeah, you're establishing what you're describing. You're establishing norms, you know, for that particular meeting.
Yeah.
You know, the other thing I would add to that is for people who aren't used to working virtually, manners matter, okay, more than probably in person. The research shows that 58% of communication is nonverbal. It's body language, it's tone, and we're missing a lot of that context in that. So be careful, you know, about, you know, the way you say things, the way that you chat, the way that you write emails, those kinds of things. When you're in a virtual meeting, people won't get it. They won't get the nuance. So slow down, be deliberate in the way you're saying it. Don't be sarcastic. That is often misinterpreted. And say please and thank you. It's like, and especially in the time of crisis, everyone can step up their manners and help people to feel more comfortable and more, you want to create an inclusive, you know, environment in that virtual space.
Perfect. So we're going to end it there. There's a handful more questions, but we'll reach out to you individually to get your questions answered. So I hope that Carrie and I were as entertaining as whatever you're watching on Netflix right now, or you know, I saw Westworld last night, so that was pretty interesting. So I hope that we could at least keep up with that and you know, provide some useful content that you can use going forward. Carrie, can you flip to the last slide real quick for me?
Whoops.
Oh, it's all good. No worries. I'll put the trial link in the chat one more time. But you know, check it out. Let us know if you have any questions. If there's any way that we can help you, reach out to myself, reach out to Carrie, find us on LinkedIn. We'll definitely.
Yeah. Charles, you know, just kind of a parting suggestion. You know, what I've found in this whole new virtual situation, there are a few things that, you know, that have been really helpful for me. especially over the weekend. I've experienced and kind of this week. For example, Planet Fitness is doing a Facebook Live every day at 4 p.m. Pacific, a 30-minute workout where you can, people get online and you do jumping jacks and stuff like that. It's pretty cool. It's pretty fun, and I've done that with, my partner, and, it kind of gets the blood flowing, and it even actually makes me feel more connected to the outside world. Also on Sunday, had a virtual brunch over Zoom with a bunch of friends. We just went on gallery view and everybody kind of made their omelets or whatever. And we were just sitting around, getting caught up and, joking around and stuff. It's, you can take those opportunities to use those tools, not just at work, but finding connectedness in the community and with friends and family. So wish you all luck in your endeavors. And I wanted to just send a sincere thank you again for joining us today.
Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time. Look for that follow-up email from me here in the next couple of hours. So we'll get you all the materials from today. Thanks a lot.